All right, folks, I think with 37 of us currently in the learning community, I think we should officially go ahead and get started. Let me just say again, welcome and a very warm welcome back. And let me also thank you all so much for making the time to join this learning community conversation, where I will be very clear. The intention for this two-part learning community conversation is to center lived experience. The fact, and again, you don't have to have lived experience in order to participate in this training, but the purpose of this learning community conversation is to intentionally center lived experience, because we're going to be taught. Hello, Sheila, welcome back. We're going to be talking about how lived experience is an invaluable resource that's brought to many different areas. Welcome back, Antonio. That's brought to many different areas and actually improves the quality of care and the retention of people in care, which would be different if folks with lived experience, again, in a variety of settings, what you all bring to this particular work. And the purpose of this conversation is to really focus on and revisit the use of lived experience, the intentional, professional, boundary use of lived experience. Okay? So we're going to take care of a couple of logistics. I'm going to briefly introduce myself, but we're going to take care of a couple of logistics. And there's actually a question that I'd like to pose for you to think about while I'm covering the logistics. I don't know if you've ever heard this, but I have heard some people with lived experience say that having lived experience and being employed intentionally, bringing one's lived experience to the work, can sometimes be a double-edged sword. And I'm just going to ask you to think about that statement, and if you have any reactions or thoughts as to why some folks with lived experience have actually made that statement in the past. And again, I'm not sure if anybody in the learning community will agree with that, but I wanted to pose that statement as kind of a way for us to get into this conversation after we've taken care of the logistics. Okay? So why would some people with lived experience say having lived experience and doing that professionally, bringing your lived experience to the work that you do, why is that sometimes considered a double-edged sword? So I'm going to ask you to think about that. I'm going to take care of the logistics, and then we'll go from there. Again, my name is Paul. I am currently a research project director at the New York State Psychiatric Institute in Manhattan. I'm also a senior staff trainer and curriculum writer for the Northeast and Caribbean Addiction Technology Transfer Center. Very fortunate also to be a member of the Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers, which is an international organization focused specifically on supporting people to adopt and refine the practice of motivational interviewing, the evidence-based practice of MI. I'm also a social worker by training, and I began my social service career in 1991, providing direct care to people living with HIV and AIDS. I did that for a little over 12 years and began in 2003 exclusively focusing on workforce development and training and technical assistance. Very, very, very happy to have the opportunity for us to be together for this two-part learning community conversation. Having said that, I'm going to share my screen and we'll take care of a couple more of those logistics. Now, because we are a learning community, again, we have a couple of very basic guidelines, but one of them is that there are 40 of us together. And what I would ask as we engage in this two-part conversation, part one today, part two on Wednesday, as we engage in this two-part conversation, that if you would be considerate and intentional about using language that is welcoming, inclusive, and respectful of everybody that's in our learning community. Also, because we are a learning community, this is meant to be relevant and supportive to you. What gets put on the table by you or me as we engage in this conversation may not officially reflect the position of our funder. And that's okay, because our funder wants this to benefit you, to support you in your work. Welcome back. If you haven't had a chance to do so, this is the last time I'll say it today in our time together, but if you haven't had a chance to do so yet, please type your full first and last name in the chat and where you're from. That's our timestamp that you're here for part 1, and come back for part 2 on Wednesday and complete that, and we'll send you the 3 hours certificate, and we will also send you a copy of these slides. I do need to remind folks that unfortunately, in order to receive any credit for your participation, you do need to be here for both parts, today and Wednesday. And unfortunately, we're not able to offer makeups. As I mentioned to one of our colleagues earlier, we do offer this course. I do offer this course fairly frequently, usually every other month or every third month. So if for some reason you're not able to stay the full time, you're more than welcome to stay if you're not concerned about the credit. But if you do want to get the credit, you would need to participate at a time when you can stay for both parts. Also, on Wednesday, there will be a very brief evaluation that I am going to do my best to make sure that there's time for you to complete that before the end of the hour and a half. And then you can go on to your next appointment. A couple of other basic guidelines. If your camera is working and you can activate it, please do. If that works for your setting, if that works for your current situation, or if it works for your learning style. I respect that everybody learns differently. Sometimes people can't be or don't want to be on camera. And if that's the case, if you're not going to be on camera today, just send me a direct message and let me know that. And that's perfectly okay. I'm just glad you're here, but do send me a direct message and let me know that. In terms of muting, oh, and I will just say one other thing about camera. If you need to step away for a moment, that's perfectly okay. And you're going to turn your camera off. Just send me a direct message and let me know you're going to turn your camera off. You don't need to let me know when you come back, but just let me know you're going to turn it off. That would be great. And just a direct message. In terms of being muted, I am going to ask that everybody, until you have something you want to contribute, until you have something that you want to say, please do remain muted. While I'm talking, if you do have something you want to say, if you have something you want to react to, information you want to offer, do not hesitate at any time. And those of you whom I've had the great honor to be in a learning community with before know that I don't mind being interrupted at all. So if you have something you want to add, question, comment on, react to, do not hesitate to unmute. What I would ask, though, is that if one of your colleagues in the learning community, other than me, has the floor, please don't interrupt them. Let them finish their point. Let's give them the respect of listening uninterrupted. Let them finish their point, and then, of course, I'll turn the floor over to you. So again, interrupt me as much as you like. Please don't interrupt each other. And then the last guideline is simply that I would invite you to, when you do offer something, to please make I statements. And for those of you who have sent me direct messages letting me know about your particular situation, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. And I'm just glad you're here. And please participate, even if you're not on camera, any way you like by unmuting or typing in the chat. So thank you for following through on that and letting me know. And again, as I said, the last guideline that I'd invite you to consider is to please speak from the I. Now, before we look at these goals, I'm just going to ask, can everybody agree to those guidelines as stated? Excellent. You can wave, you can nod. Excellent, Dawn H. Wonderful. You can type Y. Thank you, Dan. You can type Y in the chat. Excellent. You can type Y in the chat. Excellent. Avi just sent us a floating thumbs up. That's great. Okay, so those are our guidelines. That is how we've agreed to interact in both parts of our conversation, today and Wednesday. And we'll just quickly review it on Wednesday as well. I'm going to go back to my screen for a moment, sharing the slides with you. And it's funny because, oh, thanks, Judith. It's funny because I think when you can see the slides, you can see me, but I can't see you. So don't hesitate to unmute, but I can't see you. So just so you know that. I'm going to share the slides again so you can see the goal. You recall, and I'll repeat it because there might have been some folks who weren't here right at the beginning because there are 42 of us at this particular point. This learning community conversation is an opportunity for us to come together and to intentionally center lived experience and to reflect on and to acknowledge. The slide says important, but I'm going to edit that briefly and say the invaluable contributions that people with lived experience make to their clients, participants, and consumers. Also, our intention is to focus on considering the proper balance of use of our self-disclosure, our personal story, how to do that in a way that is best for the client and done in a person-centered method. So that's essentially what we're going to focus on in this 3 hours together. Again, hour and a half today, hour and a half Wednesday. To that end, these are our learning objectives for the total of both days, not just for today. So just so you can keep that in mind, we're going to talk, of course, about the benefits of lived experience, the rationale for sharing it. Hopefully, we're going to talk through and you'll share your process or the way you go about determining when and how to share your lived experience. And ultimately, reflecting on the intentions of it. So when you are in a situation and you might choose to share lived experience of whatever sort, what's actually the intention behind that? What are you hoping to achieve with that sharing so that it's not necessarily just automatic? You make a deliberate, informed decision. Also, the idea that having lived experience and disclosing that experience is a very relevant topic for peer supervision, individual supervision, clinical supervision. And then in terms of the methods of how we may share our stories or share information, we'll talk about the process or the rationale for asking permission before sharing our story or sharing information, and also a process of self-reflection before, during, and after any time that we self-disclose. Okay. Excellent. So those are our learning objectives. I know 7 learning objectives for a 3-hour conversation is ambitious, but there it is. And before we get to this preliminary question, I asked you to think about something prior to our covering the logistics. And I'm wondering if anybody in the learning community, and I think somebody put something in the chat, it got a little bit buried, but is there anyone in the learning community that remembers the question that I asked you to contemplate before we went into covering the logistics? Does anybody recall what that question was? And would you be willing to unmute and share the question? Yeah, go ahead, Jacqueline.
Hi, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Happy to be here. Yeah, you asked us to think about the intentional professional use of lived experiences and how that could affect your person-centered care with the client, or
Okay.
how it could go wrong. So I actually have a recent example to share.
Please go right ahead.
One of my clients was killed in an automobile accident. And the family had called me, and I went to the house to provide support for them. Everyone, the whole family was there.
Mm,
And I was there for about 4 hours as people started to leave. So it left myself and his wife.
mhm,
And as she talked and talked and talked, and she said, I'm so thankful for, you've been here from the beginning and blah, 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 blah. And then I asked her, I said, and because I wanted to try to join with her. And she says, have you ever experienced any pain, grief, what I'm feeling? And I
mhm,
said, well, do you mind if I share with you about my father? And she said, oh, yeah. She said, your father died? And I said, yes. Now, my father died 16 years ago. So I thought this was going to be a straight discussion. I was going to talk about the grief and, how it took me so long to go through his clothing and whatnot. And
mm,
as I started talking about him, a lot of feelings came up that I was not anticipating because my husband was also sick, like as I was talking to her about, but I had never shared with her what I was going through with my husband who recently passed.
mhm,
But so I guess the experiences that I was going through with my husband, knowing that he was sick and I was supporting him, that sort of came up in the conversation as I was, well, it didn't come up. I didn't discuss him. I didn't discuss anything about him. She knew I was married, but I never said anything about my husband. But those
mhm,
emotions came up
mhm,
as I
mhm,
was talking to her about my father. And then all of a sudden, I just burst into tears and I was trying to pull it back, and I'm thinking like, wait a minute, I'm here to support her, and now and she was surprised, and she said, oh, she said, wow, this is 16 years, and you're still feeling this, So I still didn't mention anything about my husband, but I just took it back to yes, grief it can carry on for a long time. You never know what feelings may come up. So I
yeah,
guess in situations like that, we may try to join with the client in their pain of what they're going through, but we've
mhm,
just got to be aware too of what we're going through, our unsuppressed emotions of other things that could be happening that could come up.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Thank you. And what a powerful example to start with. And I thank you for that because you're really describing how critical it is to be self-aware
Yeah.
about maybe even the things that aren't directly related, but somehow connected to that, and how that can bring up feelings for us and can bring up feelings that will cause the focus to shift from them to us. Very,
Yes.
really powerful example.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Dan, I saw that you wrote double-edged sword in the chat. That was kind of the image that I offered, and I'm wondering if you had any thought about that. Why? And Jacqueline gives a good example. I'm wondering if you have any thought about why either you think of lived experience that way, or people that you know with lived experience may think that.
Sure, sure. I can offer some insights here. Thoughts that came to mind for me was more the idea of maybe transference or maybe the ideas of stigma, self-stigma,
Okay.
the judgment that might be inherent. We when we're holding space, we're obviously trying to circumvent such biases and perspectives, but they can crop up. Emotions can sometimes get the best of us, and I couldn't help but think of those ideas of transference and stigma, whether it's you know uh, stigma as a whole or stigma, judging
Mhm, mhm.
oneself in the moment of trying to provide support, and those are the things that came to mind for me.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Dan.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm going to just quickly check the chat because I know a couple of people put some things in the chat. But again, if somebody else wants to unmute and comment on this double, Miguel wrote in the chat, good morning. My answer to the first question asked would be, my context can be different to the client's context. Okay. Not what helped me could help the client. Okay. And three, I don't want to make feel, maybe it's make the client feel that she needs to replicate my actions or decisions. Yeah. Okay. And Antonio wrote, Judith, we're going to come right to you. Antonio wrote, it can be useful as long as it doesn't shift focus away from the client. Yep. Violating professional boundaries or meeting the counselor's emotional needs. Yeah. Which again is turning it back to us. Thank you, Antonio. Judith, the floor is yours.
Hi, Paul and
Hi.
everyone. So over the years, I have stopped sharing my testimony. And if sometimes I will say I knew someone or I heard of or I read, if I felt like there was something that needed to be shared that was actually about me, but I wouldn't say I would just put it in another context. And then the topic on the double-edged sword. So for me, when I'm in a methadone clinic, I have a lot of clients that are still active, although that they are on the methadone. Um, from experience, you see the road when people won't stop and what happens. I've had clients for like 10 years and you can see people dying, and that's a very painful part of it when I know there's nothing I can do. Because information is only as powerful as the person is able to receive it. So you actually watch people doing like a passive suicide because they're just not going to stop. There's nothing, I'm only a messenger. And so I think that's enough to share. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Judith. Thank you. And before we go to Pete, I just want to underline, Judith made me think, as she was saying what she said, that one of the very powerful elements or benefits of lived experience is that it goes beyond information. It's not just information. There's a whole other aspect or quality to it that can have a positive impact. Yeah. Pete, thank you so much for your patience. Good to see you. Can't hear you, Pete. You're muted. You're still muted.
Sorry about that, Paul. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I like what was shared. I agree with, everything so far is, I think from my experience, for me personally, it's knowing how some people can be manipulative, and maybe because that's part of my lived experience, as a manipulator, me personally, I could hear it in a person's voice. I could see it in their face. And then sometimes my compassion starts to kind of get cut off. Like, if I'm not, I did a lot of phone work and I could hear it in their voice. My eyes would roll, the feeling in my heart is like, I'm not feeling this person. I mean, I had this one experience once where this person was seeking help. He knew everything that had to be said, but then my coworkers knew his story outside, and was telling me it's a whole lot different, but he was manipulating the system. And, so I would do a little bit more inquiry, but he answered everything perfectly. So, I mean, the only thing I could do is help him. So in that sense, it's like, lived experience to me, you can tell sometimes with the people that you're helping, what they're doing, but at the same time, you got to remember your role. Right. And that's where that double-edged sword is. It's hard. Like, you want to call them out, but at the same time, you're here to do a job. So.
Yeah. Pete, if it's okay, can I follow up before we go to Melissa? Can I follow up with you on two things that you said?
Please.
So one thing that you said, and just, I want to make sure I heard this correctly, because I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think I heard you say that I am attuned, or I can recognize manipulation because I've manipulated in the past. Is that what you communicated?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it's
So
something.
that's my lived experience, right?
Yes.
To me, it's getting in the way.
Got it.
Like, I can't, it's like, I'm already judging without just hearing their story and, reading into things. I mean, I'm sure my intuition is right. It doesn't matter. That's what I'm saying. And we have to be aware of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the second thing, if you don't mind, is could I ask you a question?
Please.
So I think I have a sense of this, but again, I don't want to put words in your mouth. When you have found yourself in that situation where your intuition goes off that this person is actually manipulating me or manipulating the situation. As a person with lived experience, what feeling, and I'm thinking of Jacqueline as I say this, but what feeling does that bring up for you? You did say that your empathy starts to go
Yeah.
down, but I'm wondering what you feel when that happens.
I feel callous. I feel my compassion fade away.
Okay.
You know, and I don't know. I not meaning to create any trick. I go into this kind of street mode mentality. Like,
Okay.
yeah, whatever, dude, or you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
you know, that's in my mind, right?
Yep.
But you know, like I said, I'm here to do a job. I'm not here to judge. I'm not here to bring that into this, right? Because we're not on the street, you know, despite what my intuition might say.
Yep.
You know, I'm here serving the community. And that's where that double-edged sword in my mind comes in, because like I think for me, my lived experience is recovery from substance
Yes.
use, right?
Yes. Yes.
So you know it's possible, but you know, I think it was Jacqueline that said they have to choose it.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's what's hard too, is that, you know, in our certain lines of work,
Yeah.
people are gonna pass on without ever getting the help that we
Yeah.
know they could have had.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that brings up a lot of feelings, especially if we have
Yes.
made a different choice personally.
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much, Pete. We're going to go to
You're welcome.
Melissa, Chelsea, and Will, and then we're going to look at what people put in the chat, because there's some really great, rich stuff coming in the chat too, and I don't want that to get lost. Melissa, thanks for your patience.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, awesome.
Awesome.
For me as a peer supporter, my lived experience is my resume, or my resume is my lived experience.
Yep.
So, you know, it doesn't necessarily always mean that I need to puke out my story or whatever, but in my experience, me going in and with that understanding, hey, I've been where you're at. And if somebody like me can do it, you surely can do it, and kind of bring that hope to them. Um, not every, I mean, I know that from my experience and from different people who have told me, they seem to open up better when they have somebody that has been where they're at. And it's kind of like meeting them where they're at too,
Yeah.
you know? And it, for me, it doesn't necessarily, you know, mean like, you know, giving them all this book smart or, you know, smarts and stuff like that and trying to be the smartest person in the room, but just kind of understand and give them that understanding and that sense of empathy. And people could tell if you've truly been where they're at versus, you know, somebody who's just been to school and is looking through a textbook, you know, because not everybody's textbook, everybody's individualized. And, you know, recovery is individualized and it's on an individual basis, and each individual is different. Some will respond well with you telling them stories about their life or about your life and stuff like that. And others, they just want to be heard, you know, so it's all about what they want.
Okay. Okay. So Melissa, before we go to Chelsea, you are really making a very clear distinction in terms of like figuring out what's going to be best for this person.
Mm-hmm.
And it might be part of your story, or it might not be any of your story, because they
Right.
just want that space to be heard, but heard with someone who's informed, who's empathic, who's not judgmental,
Mm-hmm. Right.
and can identify with the reality of what they're saying.
Right.
Got it. Got it.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank
Melissa.
you.
Yeah, of course. Chelsea, the floor is yours.
Hey Paul, hi again. So I wanted to quickly speak on two different points of view. So
Yeah, go ahead.
I had a therapist when I was in college, and for like 5 sessions in a row, it had nothing to do with what I was sharing with her, but she would continually talk about the loss of one of her family members. And it got to the point that I'm like, am I here to like help you, or are you here to help me? So like that definitely crossed the boundary for me. So I actually ended up switching therapists because I'm like, I can't deal with this. Like every single session, we spent at least 20 and 30 minutes talking about their loss, and I just didn't think it was appropriate.
Yeah.
I didn't feel like I was getting the help. So that's an example of when it goes out of the boundary.
Yep.
The second thing, I work with people with substance use disorders, and I don't have one. I don't have substance use disorder, but my entire family does. So it's actually opened my eyes. But when I work in group sessions, I definitely don't share that and or any of my experiences with my family really, because I feel like the fellowship of the meetings is I give their peers the opportunity to share, and I've learned a lot, and I'm really grateful that they're all able to share with each other what they're going through, and that fellowship is so important. So I really enjoy that.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Chelsea. Thank you. And you prompt me to want to throw out two very important words in terms of what you said, and on both sides, authenticity and genuineness. Not presenting yourself as something you're not, and also keeping the boundary of not interfering in something that you're not part of the group, you're facilitating the group. Yeah. Will, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Paul.
Sure.
So I think lived experience for me, basically, I don't want the client or the patient to think that we're friends. So I
Okay.
think self-disclosure and stuff like that is really sensitive, you know. I can tell you my experience as a client. So when my union forced me to go to treatment back in '89,
Mhm.
all right, thank God no interruptions, right? And my mother was diagnosed with fourth stage cancer a month after I was in treatment. And I had an enormous amount of guilt and shame, you know, with my mom's, right?
Mhm.
And my sisters were gonna drive up to come tell me because I
Mhm.
was upstate New York. And
Mm.
basically the director said, if you trust us, we can handle this and then we'll let you know what's going on. And they said, okay, cool, let's go from there. And one of the counselors, right, said to me, you know, we got some terrible news for you, but what I want you to know is not what's important is not the news. The importance is what do you do with the news that you're going to receive.
Mhm.
So his lived experience was if you leave, you're going to use because the
Mm.
guilt and shame is overwhelming.
Mhm.
And I'm going to tell you something. I'm a one-time treatment person and I do take care of myself. You know, I really believe in a lot, serious wellness. All right. I have shared some stuff with some patients. I've had to
Mhm.
share some lived experience because the feeling I was getting from what the patient was going through, that they were going to terminate treatment and say the hell with it and go use, right?
Mhm.
And I have shared some stuff with them, but
Mhm.
that's not the framework of my counseling.
Okay.
My the way I counsel comes from different perspectives,
Okay.
school and everything else, because I do believe that just counseling, you know, off your sleeve is not going to work. And I really believe that because I see it all the time.
Mhm.
You know, I think it's important that if we can make a change in one person's life
Mhm.
by sharing, like what Jacqueline shared, right? If we
Mhm.
can make that one, okay, this is the right timing. This is what I need to say, come to my office, right? This is what's happening. And not spend an hour with them, but just say, hey, listen, I need you to know this. This is what's going on, right? I
Mhm.
think it makes the big difference because I know that most of our patients, they feel alone. They feel alone. They feel no one has went through what they're going through. And
Mhm.
they need to hear those lived experiences. But
Mhm.
lived experiences should not be abused in any shape, fashion, or form, because
Right.
that's not the way we work.
Right.
Okay. Thank you,
Yeah.
Paul.
Yeah, thank you. And again, you're really emphasizing how the boundaries are so important, and the intentional use based on the unique situation. So let's look at the chat. Dan wrote apathy as being one of those edges. Yeah, that can be one edge of the sword where you can become apathetic. And that's a very much a downside of that two-sided sword. Chantal writes two things. When is it appropriate to share a lived experience to the client, and important just to remember to meet the client where they, caps, are at when sharing your lived experience with recovery, grief. So maintaining self-awareness, empathy, and professionalism. Yep. And
Can I say, oh, sorry, Paul.
go ahead,
And I was
Chantal. Interrupt me. Interrupt me.
I was like, wait, I can interrupt him. No.
Yes, you can.
So I can't remember who said it, but when you're dealing with clients that are in, in crisis, because I see them, in hospitals, jails, things like that,
Yep.
and they're using, and they're just like, oh, I'm never going to get out of this, things like that. And, that's the only way. And I say, without calling them out per se, because people that do use substances can be manipulative, but without saying that outright, I like to say, as someone that's been in recovery, people use substances for two reasons: curiosity or escape. And I'm pretty sure we're past curiosity. So whenever you get to ready to deal with why you're using, that's your ticket. That's your ticket. Because my mother died over 15 years ago. I didn't deal with it for 10 years. I did a lot of drugs and I had to go in recovery. And that's why I let them know. But I was like, there is hope. You can come out of it, but you have to face it. And it takes a lot of work. So whenever you're ready to do that, that's your ticket. So, and sometimes, the client is receptive, but there's a lot of times where they're just not ready for that. But what they choose to do with that information, is up to them. So, but if I can help one person with that, then it's worth it. So that's what I was going to add on that.
Thank you. Thanks for adding to it. And we'll come right to you, Judith. I just want to cover a couple of other things to chat. Don't lose your thought though, okay? So Rhonda wrote, so true, Pete, self-awareness. Antonio writes, effective sharing of lived experience in substance use disorder counseling is, when done well, it enhances trust and engagement. When done poorly, it compromises ethics, objectivity, and client safety. Yeah, really clearly and succinctly stated. Melissa adds, hold on a second. Melissa adds, the greatest thing about lived experience is what is unsaid rather than what is said. It's like some have shared, it's what allows us to bring something to the space, and the experience is knowledge, is our resume and knowing our biases that may hinder or be obstacles to our service. So we can learn and grow. As a result, we offer more because of this fact, okay? And Dan wrote verisimilitude. And Dan, would you like to say, just before we go to Judith, would you like to say why I think maybe what Melissa wrote prompted you to think of verisimilitude and what you mean by that?
It was actually just you had mentioned authenticity, genuineness, and just that fancy word came to mind, verisimilitude, just being authentic.
Yeah, and it is a fancy, excellent, authentic word, because I believe the Latin root of veri, V-E-R-I, is truth.
Verify, right?
Yes.
For the truth,
Yes.
seek truth. Yep.
Veritas. I think that's Italian, maybe a veritas.
That's true.
Latin, I think. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. I did study Latin for 4 years when I was in high school, but let's not get into that. So Antonio writes, why oversharing is particularly risky in substance use disorder treatment. Substance use disorder clients often present with boundary confusion, attachment disruptions, authority mistrust, shame-based identity, court-involved or coercion. Oversharing can create emotional dependency, undermine accountability, encourage comparison or minimization, reinforce peer-to-peer dynamics instead of treatment roles, trigger rescue fantasies, or counter transference. And in parentheses, say less, meaning be very intentional and clear about the quantity or the amount that you may choose to disclose. Chantal, I'd like to follow up on my comment. You did. Wonderful. And if you want to add anything else, feel free. Chelsea adds, a sword can protect or kill. Sharing can both help people or it might even damage their recovery. Very powerful. Yes. And okay. Thank you so much, Judith, for your patience. I just wanted to make sure I covered that. And then Brian just put something in the chat we're going to look at too. But go right ahead, Judith. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Paul. So they've introduced this past year on harm reduction in the methadone clinic. So I have had to make adjustments to my thinking and my approach in discussions with clients.
Yeah.
So now it's more like if a client chooses that they want to continue using substances, I have to be empathetic and you know, say it's okay. These are your choices. We're you know, we're giving you the information, but is it possible to maybe pull back, cut back, or what other steps would you be open to look at? You know, to cut down the consequences of the danger that still exists. So in the listening to everybody,
Yeah.
It it's a lot to just switch over.
Yeah, and you're pointing out that it's a really big adjustment because there's something very definitive about abstinence. And again, you know, depending on your lived experience or your personal experience, just stopping something completely can be one thing, and then figuring out how to do it in a way that maybe causes less harm, whatever it may be, is a whole other complex and unique.
And I just wanted to add really quick that yeah, in the past year there have been several clients that have passed away because they were not able to stop. And it is very emotional to hear that so and so did OD, and you know, because all I am is a messenger. That's it. That's okay. That's all.
Thank you so much. Brian wrote in the chat, oversharing also makes it more about you and less about the peer. Absolutely, Brian. Yeah, I mean, completely. It puts the focus on you. Absolutely. Absolutely. So this may seem like an absolute out of left field question, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. And that question is there anybody in the learning community right now that is either currently in Connecticut, the state of Connecticut, or is from the state of Connecticut? Is there anybody in the learning community that's in Connecticut or from the state of Connecticut? And I'll wait a moment to see if anybody responds to that. Okay. So it looks like, at least from what I'm seeing, nobody is identifying that they are either in the state of Connecticut or from the state of Connecticut. All right, which leads me to have to move to the next level of my question. Is there anyone in the learning community who's ever been to the state of Connecticut? Okay, Chelsea's been there, Rhonda's been there, Kelly's been there, Judith has been there. Okay, all right, good. All right, so Kelly, if it's Sheila, you've been there too? You've been there too? Okay. So Sheila, I'm gonna ask, if it's okay, I'd like to ask you and I'd like to ask Kelly, if that's all right, Kelly, is that all right? So the two of you, you've both been to Connecticut. Where were you in Connecticut?
I went to it was years ago.
Okay.
I went to a Mystic
Seaport?
Yeah, to the seaport with my nephew. He must have been 9 or 10. He's 29 now. So
wow.
Yeah. So we took the Metro North out to Connecticut.
Okay.
Yes.
Fantastic. Kelly, where were you in Connecticut?
Springfield.
Kelly,
I just went.
Springfield. You were in Springfield.
Right.
Okay.
Is that where the
Okay.
Mohegan Sun is? I wasn't there for gambling. I was there actually for some other event that they had there.
Fantastic.
But I'm
Fantastic.
sure I've been there other times, but that's the only one I can think of right now.
Right. That's the one that comes to top that you've been to Mohegan
Mhm.
Sun, which is a casino.
Right.
Okay. Fantastic. So the reason I asked that, folks, is because what Kelly and Sheila and I have in common is that we've all been to Connecticut. And I will acknowledge that I am from Connecticut. I grew up in Connecticut. And the reason I ask that question is because when you find you have something in common with someone, what effect does that create? Daquan you have a very the smile on your face to that question. When you find you have something in common with someone, yeah, it creates a connection. Any other thoughts about what it creates? Connection, community. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And having lived experience is having something in common. And Chantal writes, creates the start of trust, potentially. Yeah. And ultimately, that is kind of the platform. And I'm going to call that the in common effect. And Rhonda agreed, you have the urge to share, meaning you want to talk about the thing you have in common. And feeling less othered or alone, Bernard writes. Bernard, you sent that as a direct message to me, but I hope you don't mind that I shared that with the whole learning community. Yeah. Not a problem. So I just want to underline that dynamic, because that's what's at work with the sharing, the use of lived experience, that you find that you have something in common to some degree. Notice Sheila and Kelly are not from Connecticut. They're not currently in Connecticut, but they went there. And I know where Mystic Seaport is, and I know where Mohegan Sun is. I remember when Mohegan Sun was built. And Sheila, I also went to the Mystic Seaport when I was in 4th grade. So, which let's just say was a number of years ago. So I think it's important to keep that dynamic in mind, because that's what's at play. And we do that with boundaries. If we're being effective, like Antonio noted, and the outcome of when we're not effective. And Chelsea, I'm going to repeat something that you said, or that you wrote, that a double-edged sword can save somebody, or it can also kill somebody. And that may seem like a dramatic statement, but to Brian's point earlier, and I think this was your point, Brian, that if we're sharing too much, all of the focus has now come back to me as opposed to that other person. So I before we go forward, I do want to pose possibly 2, but at least 1 additional question. And I'm very curious as to what people's reaction to this question is what do you rely upon to determine if your lived experience is a resource that you're going to use at any given moment? What do you rely upon? What's your way of determining if your lived experience is a resource that you're going to bring to that moment or that Go ahead, Melissa. G, go ahead.
So I feel like everything about what I do, I can't disconnect that. The way that the young man said, verisimil, I can't say it.
Verisimilitude.
Yeah, verisimil.
Yeah. We'll get Dan to
I
say it for
we'll
us.
get
Go
him to
ahead.
say it for us.
He
So
wrote it. So
that's awesome. Yeah. I feel like
good word, Dan.
I realized a few years ago in doing in my studies, you know, to get through getting my degree and stuff, that if I wasn't going to be authentic to myself, this was the wrong field to go into. So I feel like I always bring that to the table. My lived experience is like the young woman or the lady said earlier, it is who I am. It should be a part of whatever I do, whether I'm in prevention care, whether I'm in
Yep.
recovery, whether
Yep.
I'm in facility, whether I'm in administration,
Yep.
whatever I do in the
Mhm.
realm of helping in this helping profession, in this
Mhm.
helping world that we are in. I want to be who I don't want to be there if I'm not going to get to be who I am. And so, you know, we're human and we do fall on biases. We fall into uh, all the things that human beings do fall into. But
Mhm.
I still feel that the truth is you are who you are. And if you can't be that, you should be that. At the same time, though, um, your story is your story. It's sacred. It's special. It's very unique to you.
Yeah.
It does not have to be, how do I say, laid out everywhere you go. You are already a walking thesaurus of who you are and what you bring to the table.
Okay.
But that's a secret thing that not everybody should be privy to. There's certain people in your life who get to know the whole book, who get to read it
Mhm.
from page to page, and
Mhm.
there are certain people who get to play parts in chapters, or there are certain people who get to be certain parts of it. So the discretion part just comes into the relationship part of it. Like, where are you? What is proper in this relationship? What is not proper? You know, yes, who you give permission to being a part of your life, that kind of thing. So, um, I think that it doesn't the discretionary period of like where it belongs or you can't help that. It should be who you are. If
Mhm.
authenticity is truth,
Mhm. Mhm.
then it is who you are at all times. But how much of it is shared, that is just based on situational
Mhm.
circumstances and the relationship
Mhm.
and, you know, all of that kind of stuff, I feel
Yeah,
personally.
thank you. And Melissa, you're making an I statement, and you made me really think that your lived experience, your authenticity is part of the way you walk through life.
I try.
Yeah. And you also are very clear about honoring your story and being very intentional about when, where, and if it's relevant to that particular moment.
Absolutely. I try to give people the same space also when it comes to their own stories.
Right. To
Mm,
honor their story.
Yeah, yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. Antonio, and then we're going to go to Melissa C.
Oh no, you know what? I was thinking about it. Um, I'm against that. I just don't do
Against what?
sharing my experience.
Okay.
I don't want to share my experience. I don't feel like that's appropriate. I'm taking away from the client, right? The only time I need to share about what's going on is when I didn't approach that situation correctly, or I've learned through my mentors and my predecessors, so to speak, that sharing too much about myself, I've said this a bunch of times, I leave myself in the car.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't take my personal life into my work life. They're not the same. And
Yeah.
if I get it misconstrued, it can become a shit show, so to speak. I'm sorry to say it like that, but just the reality of it. So
Sure.
I remember, because I come from lived experience, right? And I remember my sponsor telling me, I would go to meetings where my agency would hold meetings for my clients. And he told me, he said, you can't go to those meetings. And I said, why? I'm there to support. He said, no, 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 no. I don't want you to get those two confused, because they're not the same. You've
Mm-hmm.
got to be able to protect yourself, and
Mm-hmm.
you've got to be able, and he don't even work in treatment.
Yep.
He's an artist.
Yep.
But he said I'm just telling you just to protect you, because I don't want them to put you up against the wall,
Mm.
right? Because they will, and they will throw you under the bus. So please do me a favor, stop going to those meetings. If you want to go to meetings, or if you want to support your own process of recovery, go to outside meetings where you can get all that stuff out that you want to get out. But don't do it around your clients, and don't, because he said it's a thin line. It's a thin line because it's a clinical approach. I put it in the chat, and it's also a personal approach, and they're not the same. One is inappropriate and one is appropriate. The clinical approach is appropriate. The personal approach can sometimes be inappropriate, right? Because we put too much on the client, and they're still trying to figure out themselves, right? So I don't need to come in and tell you a long drawn out story about myself and how the process of recovery works for me.
Okay, thank you, Antonio. And I also want to acknowledge, before we go to Melissa C, I want to acknowledge that there are potentially people in this learning community that you were hired for your position because you have lived experience, and your lived experience is part of your job description. And what we're talking about is how that is intentionally, and Melissa G, I'm thinking of you when I say this, honorably and respectfully brought into your work and Rhonda says that would be my position. Okay, Rhonda. So I think we're looking at is how to balance that. And there's a word that Judith put in the chat that I really like, which is discernment. And again, the thing I'm asking us to consider, and Pete is also saying that's part of your job description as well, that how we go through that process of discernment. Antonio is making a very clear statement in terms of the nature of this work that he does. He's very clear about the boundary between those two things. Very clear about the boundary between those two.
Can I add something too, Paul? Not to cut you off.
Of course you can. Go right ahead.
I didn't learn this overnight. I learned this through trial and error. So there was a few people that walked out of my office because I didn't know how to conduct myself.
Yeah.
Right. And I had to learn that. I had to always go back and ask for guidance and peer consultation and case conference where I would address. And people were telling me, you're not a bad counselor. You're not a bad drug court liaison. Right. You just can't show them too much of your story.
Yes.
You've got to let them learn for themselves. Yeah. You've learned it, and we see that. Yeah. But you've got to give them the opportunity to empower their own process.
Yeah, thank you. And of course, our personal learning isn't transferable to somebody else. Our experience, our compassion, our presence, our empathy can be really helpful, but everybody's on their own journey with the learning. Melissa C, thanks for your patience. Floor's yours.
I really love what everybody has shared so far. And, I really thank you, Antonio, for sharing, your perspective and everything, because I can definitely see that side of it. Like you said, Paul, I was one of those that got hired based on my, lived experience. But I've learned how, and this came with trial and error, I learned how to have boundaries with that. Certain things I do not take to the client, like if I'm going through something, if I'm going through a struggle and things like that, they don't need to hear all that. My lived experience comes with how I walk. That's what they want to see. They want to see how I walk. They want to see if my walk and my talk are going to match. Because if they're not matching up, then that means that they see me as a hypocrite. And I really love how the other somebody else had mentioned being that authentic self.
Yeah.
Being authentic, there's a lot of truth to it because they see that you're real. They see that, okay, you don't have, it's like that unspoken bond, that I've been through it, but you don't need to hear that I've been through it because you could clearly see that I've been through it,
Right. Right.
And yeah, my experience and, what got me through may not work for the next person. There is multiple pathways to recovery.
Right.
And kind of guiding them and allowing them to take the wheel on that, so to speak, is a big part of what is needed or what I can do for them. And sometimes just, being there to be a listening ear, to be a good listener, to hear them because, a lot of people don't feel like they're being heard.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they just need that too.
Yeah. Yeah. Melissa, before we go to Valentina, can I ask you sort of a quick follow-up question?
Sure.
So you, similar to Melissa G, have mentioned this idea of how our simple walking through our inner, being our authentic selves,
Mm-hmm.
interacting with folks in and of itself is a communication of our lived experience.
Mm-hmm.
Would it also be fair to say that in some situations, at some times, there is a value or a benefit, again, given the nature of your work, when appropriate and when it feels right for you, and especially when you've discerned, thank you, Judith, when you've discerned that it's right for that client, is it also fair to say that giving voice or sharing part of your lived experience actually can be of value?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. But it's all, like others have shared, it's all about, when to be able to do it.
Yes.
For me, in my experience, I have learned how to share my story or share parts of it while still having that boundary up.
Okay.
And being able to give them a little bit of vulnerability, a little bit of humility, but not too much to where I'm being taken advantage of either. Knowing when to say no, knowing when to be able to call those behaviors out for what they are.
Okay.
So
okay.
there's a lot that comes into play with that.
Okay, absolutely. And again, I want to link what you're saying to what Brian wrote in the chat, that again, it seems that you're able to do that without turning the focus onto yourself.
Right.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. Valentina, the floor is yours, and then we're going to go to Chelsea.
Hey, thanks.
Hey, look at that. Terrence is in the room with you. Fantastic.
He's my coworker. Yeah.
That's nice to know.
So in a rural area, sometimes it could be complex. And so therefore I have to do my pathway recovery in a different town. I usually like to do.
Okay.
But also I had an experience of where I was going through some things to where the whole town knows me from this experience. I'm always like, you got to know your audience, and when when it's time to share an experience, you can share the experience. And I always tell everybody, every day you're gifted with an opportunity to experience an experience. The unknown will become known. But through my experience of the thing that I had to go through, or I got to go through, then people that I work with got to reach out to me and said, hey, I know that you have the experience through this. And when it comes to grief or losing people, all of a suddenly, I'm like, there are no words I could ever say that's going to make you feel better, but I can hold space for you.
Right.
And sometimes that just works like that. But in the rural areas, like, everyone's business before you even meet them sometimes. You know what I mean? And how can you just be there and like act like you hear it for the first time and just like help guide them? And I always like to remind people, how can I get you to a point where you like emotionally or mentally don't need me anymore? So like that's the goal. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You're not trying to create dependence on you.
Yeah.
Like, I can only do it if Valentina's there with me. Yeah. You want to avoid that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Valentina. Thank you. Chelsea, the floor is yours.
Hi, yes, as always, you make me think a lot, and everybody shares, so it made me think a lot. And I actually thought of something that sometimes I struggle with is that a few years ago, my entire life story was published in a book. So it's online and it's also in a book. And when I was choosing if I wanted to include my life story in the book, which is like 70 pages, was I going to do it anonymously or not anonymously?
No.
And I chose not to do it anonymously because I feel like some people need to hear my story, but at the same time, like the peers that I work with can definitely look it up online if they, have my name.
Yeah.
And I was chosen to present at a conference in a couple months, and that's another aspect of it is like how much do I share about myself at these conferences as well. And the last thing I wanted to mention is that when I'm in a therapeutic state, space, or working with a peer one-on-one or in the groups that I facilitate, I definitely don't talk about everything in my life story, which I mentioned earlier. It's like the space that I'm in there is definitely different than outside, and outside is like being in a book, being in a conference. It's definitely, those different spaces are very different, and we have to be aware of those differences.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, Chelsea, you didn't use this word, but another thing I heard, and I think we could link this to any disclosure, whatever the setting, there's a certain degree of vulnerability. And that has an impact on us. And we're always making decisions. And again, Melissa G, I'm thinking of you as I say this. How much are we going to share of our honored and personal and private story? Because it's not just for throwing it out there. Yeah, 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 yep. And Antonio put in the chat, if the counselor's experience becomes the emotional center of the room, it is no longer therapeutic. Absolutely. Just like if somebody's, to Brian's point, if somebody's going on with their story and that becomes the center of the room, it's no longer helping the client. Timing gate is the client emotionally regulated enough to receive this. Purpose gate, what specific therapeutic outcome does it serve? And risk gate, could this blur boundaries, increase dependency, or reduce client agency, their ability to self-advocate or navigate? If all three gates are not clearly met, do not share. So you're really laying out, Antonio, kind of a framework for that. Casey Ann writes, how does sharing help the client? Why are we sharing? We must be honest with ourselves first and foremost to center the client. Ultimately, those with lived experience have overcome what others are still struggling with. So sharing from a point where you're now on the other side can make the client shut down or feel judged. Potentially, yeah. Rather than relate, they could reject. Yeah. Yep. Thank you. Judith, the floor is yours.
Right. Thank you again, Paul. So I'm not sure if this is appropriate. I'm going to say that to start.
Okay. So fasten your seatbelts, everybody. Go ahead.
And so I commend the lady that has the book and put her name there. Yeah. And I am in recovery, and I have had people from my community approach me about my addiction and things like that. And I've also had, some clients on occasion approach me, oh, I heard. And so my response, because my boldness in my recovery is the same boldness that I had in my addiction. And I said, yeah, I was a junkie. I was a crackhead. And what, you have a question? Do you want to question my CADC, my master's degree, my new home, or my brand new car? Do you have a question? And so I'm just putting that out, that sometimes I have to have that boldness, because people think that they can just come at you because you have a history of addiction. And so I approach it with courage, boldness, and yeah, I was a junkie. And you have a question. That's what I'm saying. Maybe it wasn't appropriate, but it doesn't happen too often. But sometimes I have to respond in that way, depending on the situation.
Yeah.
Because even family members have approached me and they're like, yeah, but you did this, that, and the other. And I'm like, yeah, you're lucky I'm in recovery right now. That's all I want to hear.
I appreciate that. And, Judith, although you're questioning like whether that was appropriate or not, I think what you're really talking about is you don't want people to make an assumption about you because you have lived experience. And sometimes it's important to set that boundary. And again, Casey writes, that's a way of fighting stigmas. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Antonio, please, the floor is yours.
Also, too, I like what she just said. She shot from the hip. Okay, so I get that. I get that.
Yeah.
But that's the part of protecting yourself, because the client can now trigger you, and you pull out your blame thrower, and shoot up the room, right? But also when it comes to professional boundaries, I believe that I don't even like to share my lived experience with my colleagues. You know, I don't want to put myself on the forefront. You don't need to know my sobriety date and all of that. And I don't, that's just not, you know, I've been around a few people that have encouraged me that once we get to that point, there's other things in our lives that we focus on. We don't just put that as, oh, I'm in recovery, I'm in lived experience. I understand I got hired for that, but also remember when my director hired me, she also told me you're no longer a client, you're an employee here now. Right. So you have to conduct yourself a certain way. And then you go to court and you got to, I'm on the other side of the courtroom now, man. I don't have time to be playing around like, you know, this is my life here, man. And I have to be professional at all times. I like to use the similarity as a parent. There are no days off. You know, you don't get any applause. And sometimes you may feel like you're not being validated, but that's okay because you still got to show up and be professional, right? And sometimes the things that you do may not be seen or heard, but they do feel you, right? They do feel you. And one of the things that I've learned from dealing with my clients is sometimes they come in and they shoot up the room. That's okay. Because tomorrow in the morning, they might come back and apologize. Right. And when those things happen or I get in contact with those situations, I always learned this from one of my colleagues too. He said, it's not about the people on your caseload. It's about everybody that walks in your agency. Right. So you need to be professional at all times. Right. Don't just pay attention to your caseload. Yes, you do. But also pay attention to every individual that walks in your agency and know how to conduct yourself. Right. And then that means everybody that's not even on my caseload is on my caseload. I don't know if that makes sense because I facilitate groups a lot. And sometimes I have groups of 35 people, 40 people, and all eyes are on me. I learned that from you too, Paul, that you got to know how to conduct yourself. You got to know how to know your audience and walk in the room. I'm not saying that lived experience isn't good. Hey, it helps a lot. Right. But I like to also be able to be self-aware of what I'm walking into as opposed to walking into a wall.
And I think you're also making an additional powerful point, Antonio, that it's lived experience plus. You're not just your lived experience. Your lived experience our lived experience shapes who we are, and we are many things. We're not just our lived experience. So I think that's an important point also to consider. Will, the floor is yours.
I wanted to mention that lived experience sometimes has nothing to do with substance background.
Yes.
You know, I had a patient that was going for a root canal, first root canal, was scared of needles and everything.
Yes.
I said, bro, I know you think this front bumper belongs to me, but it does. But I do have a couple of, you know, crowns in there, and I've had to have a root canal myself. I said, and I projected more than what it was. And when it was done, I got a nice crown. So it doesn't always have to be, you know, a substance, you know, related issue. That's all I wanted to say, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So folks, as we start to bring this part of our time together, I'm going to share my screen and just walk us through a couple of things that will sort of lead us into what we're going to be doing tomorrow as well. And I am hopefully going to invite you to consider a particular question until we see each other again on Wednesday. Okay, so I'm going to throw something out for you to consider and bring to the table when we meet again on Wednesday. So I'm going to share my screen. And I think we've gotten to this idea of the having things in common with people through the use of Connecticut. So you all identified that having something in common can lead to a sense of safety. It can lead to engagement and openness, where a person can start to develop trust. And I want to throw this phrase out that will be very familiar to, I think, many people in this learning community. And I think it will also apply, as Will just said, that lived experience isn't always just I mean, there are people with lived experience who are employed because of their lived experience that has nothing to do with substance use. So there can be a wide field, and I think that this phrase can be relevant to all those areas. So I'm going to put this phrase up, and then I'm just curious to see if anybody has any reactions to it and its relationship to lived experience. So I'm going to let you look at that, read that. And after you've looked at that and read that, again, any thoughts, any reactions to it, and then let me know if you want to comment on it. And I'm going to take it down in just a moment. Let me know you've completed reading it by typing the letter Y in the chat. And I'm watching the chat right now. Okay, good. Excellent. Fantastic. So it looks like people have read it. Fantastic. And again, I'm going to get a sense that it's probably familiar to many people in our learning community. So I'm going to take it down. And I just want to invite, yeah, Chelsea, please, the floor is yours.
Really quickly, it brought up the quote that I think many of us are also aware of. Like those who don't study from the past are bound to repeat it.
Repeat it.
So whether it's a big historic event like the Holocaust or something minor like a personal thing, we can always take the negative events and learn from them. That's what I got from that.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Valentina, please.
I didn't know that one of the biggest, sorry, I have an echo in here. One of the biggest painful things I had experienced would be beneficial. That helped so many others. So at the time, I was like, why do I have to experience this? Why did this happen? And then down the road, I am like, now I know why I experienced this, and now I know why this happened. And the best person to help with another person would be me, right? In this situation. So
Yeah, thank you, Valentina. And again, in the moment, that never even crossed your mind. But as life went forward, yes. Okay. Melissa, please. Melissa C.
I really love this quote. It's always helped me over the years in recovery. And one of the things that I've always taken away from it is I no longer have to carry that shame and guilt from my past. That what I've done doesn't make me who I am. It's my learned experience in the process that helps, make me a better person. All I could do is better today than what I did yesterday and be better tomorrow than I was today, and it's just a everyday reprieve with me.
Thank you. Thanks, Melissa. And Pete sent you some hearts in regard to that. Avi writes in the chat, I think that quote is all about extending grace. We're all imperfect individuals and people prone to making mistakes. Strength comes from realizing that imperfection and showing kindness and compassion unto others as they regain strength to get back on their feet and try again. And Chantal adds progress, not perfection. And Avi adds, thanks for your boldness and sharing, Judith, very brave and courageous. Yes. Our test is our testimony, Jacqueline put in the chat as well. Thank you, Jacqueline. So folks, this is what I'm going to ask you to think about until we see each other on Wednesday. And I'm going to steal the word that Judith put in the chat because I think discernment is critical to determining the use of lived experience, the intentional use of lived experience. And what I'm going to ask you to think about until we see each other next is when you feel if you feel until Wednesday, if you're in a situation where you feel the draw to share part of your lived experience, and then you make the decision to do it, how did you determine that it was appropriate to do it in that moment and the amount that you shared? So when you feel that draw, or you're in the situation where you feel drawn to share your lived experience, how did you determine, yes, I'm going to, or no, I'm not going to? And how much, the quantity of your lived experience that you shared. So I'm gonna, if the situation comes up, I'm gonna ask you to just reflect on that. And if the situation doesn't come up, I'm gonna ask you to reflect on that, if indeed it did. And again, you may be participating in this learning community conversation and may not have a particular type of learning lived experience. That's okay. It shouldn't keep you from having the opportunity to reflect on how you would determine, yes, I'm going to, or no, I'm not going to, and how much, what quantity did I share? Does anybody have any questions, reactions, or comments about what I'm asking you to think about for next time? Is it fairly straightforward? Yeah? Okay. So I'll just acknowledge that Brian wrote in the chat, if you are still regretting your past, you are still living it. My experience has shown me living in the past. I also hyper focus on the future and fail to live in the moment. Yes. Okay, and Chantal says, no questions. Rhonda said, it gives me hope, grace, and strength, and I presume that's the quote. And Antonio writes in the chat, the quote means you do not have to hate yourself to be accountable. You do not have to erase your past to move forward. Your worst experiences do not define you. They can inform you. Recovery turns pain into wisdom after responsibility is taken, meaning not perfection, sustains long-term recovery. The past stops being a liability when it is understood, integrated, and used responsibly. Kelly, the floor is yours. Go right ahead.
I have a question off topic because I've taken your webinars before. Did you want our email? And okay, because I know previously you'd asked us to put them in the chat. I didn't.
No,
I came in a couple minutes late, so I didn't know if you asked.
That's okay. No, I just need your first and last name and where you're from, Kelly. You don't need to put your email in because we have that.
Thank you.
And thanks for asking for, for asking for a technical question. That's great.
Right.
Thank you. So folks, thank you. I'm looking forward to seeing you Wednesday, and thank you so much, and very much looking forward. Be well, take good care, and we'll see you Wednesday. Thanks, everybody.